So I'll just give you the scenario exactly what happened. Young lady on the corner, she's completely intoxicated, but she calls an Uber driver. As you know, Uber gives you a description of the vehicle that you're getting, even the color and make. An Uber driver with that exact description pulls up on the corner and drops off someone. She approaches the driver and she says, "You're my Uber driver." She says, "No, ma'am, I'm not. I actually am here dropping off someone." "No, you're not. You're my Uber driver. This is the vehicle that I'm getting on." He locks the door and she just starts going bazonkers on his car. And she starts damaging the car. It was about over $6,000 worth of damage. 911 is called by this Uber driver and some other people. We get the call. We then respond. By that time that we respond, you would think that the scenario would change. In other words, she's either tired, she already did the damage that she did. No, she was still going full hardcore on this vehicle when we got there. When we get there, we get out the car, and she looked as average as possible. But the violence that she was just exuding, it shocked me.
Hello, this is Voices from the Watch, a podcast centered on crime, public safety, and quality of life. I'm David Goldstein. I'm a retired lieutenant platoon commander from the NYPD. Prior to the NYPD, I spent a couple of years on the LAPD as a patrol officer, and after retiring from the NYPD, I spent a couple of years as a campus police officer in Boston. Now I make my living as a writer. My first novel, Another Body in Brooklyn, was published this past October, and my second book, a collection of crime fiction called Bullets Over Bourbon, is going to be out by the time this podcast airs. If you want to learn more about me or my books, you can check out my author website, anotherbodyinbrooklyn.com. For our podcast today, we will be discussing an issue that affects almost everyone and that you see in the news all the time pretty much, and that's going to be emotionally disturbed persons, or EDPs in NYPD parlance. So an emotionally disturbed person is somebody who, due to a psychological condition, sometimes exacerbated by alcohol or drugs, are in need of police intervention. Now, sometimes the intervention only rises to the level of police helping them get home, helping them get medical attention, find a caretaker who could take custody of them, or a family member or other kind of caregiver. However, if police determine that the person is a danger to themselves or others, or unable to take care of themselves due to a psychological issue, then that person becomes what's known as an emotionally disturbed person, and the NYPD has to take custody of that person and ensure that they get seen by a psychologist in a hospital. So they have to go to the hospital for that mental evaluation. The NYPD, as an individual officer, if you determine the person's a danger to themselves or others, you have no discretion in the matter. They have to go to the hospital. Now, on every shift, the NYPD individual officers will respond to this call 3 or 4 times each on a shift. In a precinct on each tour, the cops on that tour could respond to 15 or 16 calls of emotionally disturbed people. It's one of the most common calls on the NYPD. New York City is a very condensed city. It's the most populous city in the country, and it's also the most condensed. So you have a lot of people in a small area, and a lot of people live in a relatively small precinct boundaries. So you are going to have a lot of these situations. Now, when a police officer first arrives on the scene of an emotionally disturbed person, whether they get called, whether they just see someone whiling out in the street, they're almost getting hit by cars and you got to just immediately take action, whatever the situation might be, the number one thing is to protect life and safety. And then way under that is protect property. The number two, obviously, within the boundaries of protecting life, is to stabilize the situation. So you have to make sure that people are safe before you could proceed with anything else. This might be handcuffing somebody. This might be isolating the person. This might be getting other people away from them. Whatever that might be, it's eventually going to most likely wind up, if it's a dangerous situation, with the person in handcuffs, not under arrest, but detained for psychological evaluation. Police then have to determine if a crime's occurred. Any kind of violent crime occurred, the person is going to be arrested, and it'll then be up to them to show that they were not guilty due to a mental illness. But obviously, any kind of violent crime, generally speaking, the person's going to be arrested. A lot of property crimes, that's true as well, but sometimes with property crimes, there's more of a discretion where you could say, look, this person's clearly out of their mind right now. And there are times when they're arrested for it and times when they are not. The majority of cases with emotionally disturbed people, we don't determine a crime has been committed, and then we just need to get them to the hospital. If we determine a crime has been committed, they still might have to go to the hospital, but it'll be with a police escort, and they will be under arrest at that point. The person is under the care of the police until the police officers are released from the hospital. So the police have to take custody of that person, get them to the hospital along with emergency medical services, and you are not free to go until that person has been taken custody of by medical personnel at the hospital, and they say you could leave. So you are responsible for that person. Now, like I said, cops go to this job all the time. It's not a once in a while thing. So you'll see things on the news where you'll see, oh my God, this terrible situation happened with a mentally ill person. That is a horrible thing when bad things happen. But just so you understand, each individual officer responds to this call hundreds of times a year. And out of the hundreds of thousands of calls that the NYPD has every year with mentally ill individuals, almost nothing bad ever happens. So it's a big news story when it does, because usually the person is not injured and the person gets to the hospital, even if sometimes there is a tussle, because some people just won't go and there's going to be a tussle. The cops tend to get hurt worse than the individual in almost all cases. Same as with arrests. The cops have things that they can do and that they can't. Cops can't headbutt people. They can't bite people. They can't spit at people. Other people don't have those rules, so cops do tend to get hurt. But generally speaking, the cops handle the situation well, everybody's fine, and the person gets to the hospital with no issues. Okay, our guest today is going to be Santo Taveras. Santo, I've known for a very long time. He and I worked together in the 81st Precinct in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn for a number of years, and I really appreciate you, Santo, for your help with the podcast and for coming on as my first guest. Why don't you give the audience a quick rundown of your experience?
First off, David, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure. I'm excited with this whole project that you're going on, from your books to your podcast. This is really great. I hope that this informative podcast kind of breaks into the barriers of liaison relationships between the public and law enforcement in general, not just in New York City, but across the country. A quick background about me: not much. I came into the police department, law enforcement, through the NYPD. I ended up in Brooklyn North. Brooklyn North, for those who do not know, that means it's like the northern part of Brooklyn. There's a bunch of precincts or stations in the Brooklyn North, or the northern part of Brooklyn. I particularly was in the 81, where I met David Goldstein. And from there, I bounced around a little bit. I got to really know the police department as a whole and the inner workings and things of that nature. And I'm very grateful for my time there. It was really great. By me meeting you, David.
Yeah, I'm part of that. Besides for that, it was good. Okay, and you are retired. You retired in what, like 2017, I think?
In 2017, I did leave the police department, yes.
Okay. And yeah, so you were in for a long time, and prior to the police, you were in the Army for a couple of years?
I was in the military for about 6 years. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Okay, so Santa, what do you think is the most common misconception the public has when thinking about the NYPD and police in general's interaction with emotionally disturbed individuals?
It's a great question. I think the misconceptions, and that's a great question for various reasons. The first one is, that's an important question that needs to be answered constantly. What is the misconception? Because misconceptions, when it comes to emotionally disturbed people, they're pretty bad when they see police interaction with emotionally disturbed people. They tend to be, they look from afar. I call it ops, the optics in regards to police interaction with emotionally disturbed people. They look horrible. There's no way to make them look great. They just look bad. It's very hands-on, the interactions with emotionally disturbed people. It's not a lot of talking down. There is a lot of talking down, but it's when it gets to the point where we have to have someone contained. You had mentioned it earlier. The containment of an emotionally disturbed person is vital. not just for the public. Obviously, that's our number one priority, but also for that particular person. And so,
Right.
containment is the number one priority when it comes to police interaction with emotionally disturbed persons. And so, I think the misconception is that our first priority is to calm the person down on a social worker type of level, and that's actually not true. By the time 911 is used to get us there, there's usually a situation that's gone really south, as we say. We've gotten to the point where we need the police. And that's why you see things like family members calling 911 because they have lost control. This person needs to be taken out of that scenario and to a hospital setting for their safety. And they use the police for that. A lot of times paramedics don't have the power to do that. It's a dangerous situation that police have to get involved. So I think the misconception, again, to answer your question, is our specific roles when it comes to emotionally disturbed people.
Right, because we do have plenty of calls where it says we get a call, emotionally disturbed person, non-violent, no weapons, wants to go to the hospital. We do have that, but a lot of times when we're called, it's because the family or the caretakers. So New York City, there are houses all across the city where you have emotionally disturbed individuals who are determined by the state that they can't live by themselves. And so they have state workers with them 24/7. Now, the precincts I worked, we had a lot of these houses all around. I was in Bed-Stuy for a long time. Then I was in 113 South Jamaica for a long time. And they'll call the police in out of these homes. You have numerous of them. They could be on a residential block with regular houses. They could be part of a two-family house. And they'll call the police out of all the homes you have in your precinct several times a day. So you're responding to these calls all the time. So I think a lot of people don't understand that at the point where social workers are not able to manage with this individual, they're threatening them with a knife, they pick up a chair, they threaten other kind of violence. At that point, the police are the only people who could do it. Even in hospitals, where people are not free to leave, where they are saying they're on a mental hold, they'll still often call the police
Well, you
to
see it.
take them when they become too violent or disorderly.
Yeah. Well, with that said, you've seen exactly what you're talking about. There is right now a large uptake in mental health disorders, and mental health situations. We just saw one a couple of days over in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where a young man, I don't know if you know about this, where this was just like yesterday, something like that, day before, where a young man had decided he was suicidal and he grabbed a rifle and took to the streets and was literally firing upon anyone that could fire, just firing. Not known as much about him other than that he has suffered some psychological past, but that's a great example of an emotionally disturbed person. Obviously, that's an extreme,
Right.
but those calls were not done by family members nor a hospital or a care.
No, that's going from anybody.
In
But
the
but
street.
yeah,
And so in the street, we get a lot of that too. We have
right.
I brought an example in regards to myself, where probably the most horrible one I've ever seen, as far as emotionally disturbed people, was a young man that was self-injuring himself and missed his femoral artery by I would say milli-inches or something, if that's the number at all. And that was just people calling the street. This happens a lot with emotionally disturbed people.
Right.
And right now we see an uptake in homelessness and drug abuse, alcohol abuse, and emotionally disturbed situations they're on the uptake. And I think vital is two things. Number one, a police training in regards, and then number two, public understanding of the police's role.
No, that's a really good point, because I like what you're saying about the guy with the rifle. So it might be that the person is emotionally disturbed, but the police's job when they arrive on that scene is not to determine that. It's to
In any situation, in any
create safety in any situation. So you got someone waving a knife around.
yeah.
The police's job is to get that person to drop the knife, then get them into custody, and then you deal with, okay, is this going to be an arrest, or is this going to be this person just going to go to the hospital for a mental health evaluation? But the first thing you have to do is guarantee the safety of the public.
Well,
That's the first thing you have to do.
what I
And
was
that's a
alluding
great
to.
point. Like, it's a great example. There's no difference between somebody going around stabbing people randomly if they're suffering from a mental health issue, or if they're just a bad person and they wanted to do that. The fact is that when a police comes on scene, he's got to handle the call exactly as he's seeing it and exactly how it's unfolding. So he can't say, well, I don't know if I want to do anything to this guy. I mean, he's probably going through a hard time, but he's stabbing people. You have to stop it. So
But yeah,
you have to stabilize the situation before you do anything else.
and that's all the situation. That's a great point in regards to the severity of the scenario. You also have scenarios where, and I've had this happen, where there's a naked man in the Dunkin' Donuts talking to himself,
Yep.
right? Completely harmless to no one. He's just sitting there having a meal. I mean, obviously, this is a disturbed person. Not everything is okay right now, and that has escalated. It's completely peaceful, and it escalates, or it doesn't escalate. Either way, police involvement is crucial to those situations because the possibility of escalation when it comes to emotionally disturbed people is pretty high. It's not something that people want to understand, or not understand. I take that back, but it's not something that people really want to talk about because we want to treat our community, our public, with respect and dignity always, right? Especially people that are suffering through emotionally disturbed or mental psychosis situations, right? But we, the police, yes, we take those things into account. But again, the priority is securing a situation. I take the situation again that I'm talking about in the Dunkin' Donuts, peacefully sitting down, completely naked, and talking to himself. I mean, he's literally not hurting anyone. He even paid for his food, right?
Get some money in his hand, I guess, or something.
Right. And
Yeah.
but he chooses to sit down, talk
Yeah.
to himself. He's completely naked. That scenario, no one's getting hurt. We show up there. We show up there first because the public doesn't see it, and this is where the community liaisons are important. The public is truly informed in regards to the police job. We get there because that scenario is extremely abnormal, right?
Right.
Even though there's no violence going on right
Right.
now.
He might not realize it at that time, but yes, it's clearly an abnormal
Completely beyond
situation.
logic at this
Right.
point,
Right.
right?
Right.
So
He
our
he
job
needs
is
to
to
go.
make sure that this person that is in an illogical state right now gets the treatment that he needs or she needs. But first, we must make sure they are safe and contained, right?
Right.
And
Right.
and that's the difference, right? We with
Yeah.
any emotionally disturbed person, we always show up with, let's make sure everybody's safe, right? We're
Right.
not
And
very
and that's
to the
right.
person. We know the situation's illogical. Let's just make this person safe and let EMS or paramedics deal with this person in the best manner possible.
Right. And we need to give them the opportunity. So we need to, detain this person, handcuff them, and calm them down, and then so that EMS can go ahead and provide them with care,
Yeah.
and we can get them to the hospital. Now, I would say with naked people, since you brought it up, I can't tell you how many.
Oh,
Sometimes it'll
countless.
be
I've had countless.
somebody like that where the guy's just walking down the street, doo, 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 and he's calm
Is
as
he
calm can
singing
be.
that song while he's walking down the street, or is this?
You know what I'm saying? Like, he's very calm. He's very calm.
Right.
Walking down the street and you'll say, "Excuse me, sir." And you've already gotten 10 calls about this, and you say, "Excuse me, sir." "Yes, officer." I mean, like, what's going, you get like that sometimes. Even then, a lot of times they will go willingly to the hospital.
Yeah.
They kind of know, but sometimes even then, you have to be really careful. You have to talk to them because sometimes they won't wanna go, they won't see there's anything wrong with it. There's also the ones who are naked and are very violent right off the bat, and a lot of that is drugs, stuff like PCP, even the K2, the synthetic marijuana,
Literally, yeah.
especially with PCP that people feel like they're on fire, so they start shedding off their clothes. So if you ever see someone yelling, I'm on fire," there's a good chance that that's drugs. And with PCP, a lot of times they will fight you. It's very hard to get them into custody without some kind of
Well,
uh,
therein
some
lies
kind
what I
of
said
a
earlier.
tussle.
Well, therein lies, and just to touch on your point, therein lies what I said earlier. The potential for escalation is always there when it comes to emotionally disturbed people. It's always there.
Right.
And that's just human nature. You have someone that's, again, in an illogical psychological state, right? They're illogically not there. So it could be a defense mechanism. It could be a naturally violence mechanism. Either way, the again, the potential is always there. So our job right away is to make sure again that this person is contained. Now let me tap onto something that you said earlier. The approach. And I guess this is a question for most people. I know for myself, in my case, in my brain, I've approached a situation where I see a gentleman walking down the street completely naked. I've multiple calls on this. I already in my brain know this person is an emotionally disturbed person. So I'm not necessarily going to talk to them as if everything's okay. I might speak to them that way, but in my professional brain, I know I'm already have an ambulance on its way. My priority is to contain this person, right? And like you said, see if they're going to cooperate, because even in that emotional disturbed state,
Sometimes they do. Sometimes they're
sometimes they
very calm and
cooperate.
nice.
Yes.
It just
Yeah,
depends.
anything could trigger cooperation, just like anything can trigger violence. Someone's tone of voice, someone's mannerisms, even sometimes even your presence can trigger a certain type of cooperation.
Well, and that's why you don't talk to people in a very aggressive voice unless you have to. Sometimes you
Yes,
do.
sir.
Somebody's in the middle of the street holding a knife, there's nothing you can do. You're gonna talk to them aggressively. You're gonna talk to them aggressive. But somebody's walking down the street naked, not hurting anybody. At first you go, sir, is there an issue? Hey, sir, are you okay? Like make sure you understand that but if they're violent at that point, it's going to be a different situation. The other thing I wanted to talk about with I just mentioned knives is I think a lot of people don't understand that one of our most common calls on the NYPD is EDP with a knife, emotionally disturbed person with a knife, because everybody in their house has knives. There are knives in kitchens and stuff like that. A lot of times when emotionally disturbed persons get upset, they grab a knife. If there's a firearm, they grab a firearm. But a lot of people will grab a knife. And so cops go to this call as a shift. You're going to go at least to one or two of these a day, at least. And as a precinct, every precinct's going to go to several of these calls a day. So an individual cop, when they have 10 years on the job, they've gone to hundreds and hundreds of emotionally disturbed person with a knife calls. So I think when people hear that a police shot a person with a knife who's coming at them with a knife, they think, oh, it's because the cops are a bunch of trigger happy idiots and they don't know how to handle this because they've never been in that situation. But the fact is, I can't tell you how many people I've walked in the house, they're holding a knife up. Now, look, if they're holding a knife up and they're still and they're just kind of like going like back and forth, but they're not moving towards you with the knife, there are things you can do. I've used taser, I've used pepper spray. All of us, I know you have, in various situations, we've had to, wrestle a knife or a gun off of somebody. But if somebody charges you with a knife, you really don't give the police much option. Unless the police has a where they could retreat, and keep in mind, you cannot retreat if there are other people in the house. The whole point is when someone says there's a male in the house with a knife, someone else in the house is calling. You can't, as a cop, you can't stay outside and say, how are we going to approach this? You have to go inside to make sure that they are not stabbing everyone in the house. And so it's no different than an active shooter. It's no different. Police hears gunshots, they run into the house.
That's a
They
great
don't sit
analogy.
outside and say,
That's
oh,
a great
what's
comparison.
going on?
Active shooter scenarios are pretty tough when it comes to like schools, because you have police entering a school where there's children still in there and you're looking for an active shooter. There's a lot of delicate maneuvers and delicate procedures that you got to follow to try to have a successful scenario. And the same thing with an emotionally disturbed person with a knife, one of the worst calls that you can get. That stuff can escalate and de-escalate so quickly, so quickly.
Right.
And then
And we do a good job of it usually.
I think
Cops do
personally,
a very good job of it normally.
I think we would, for the most part, New York City Police Department and most police departments, a lot of police departments are pretty good at it. De-escalation and safely containment and all those good things. But it is vital to understand the difference of a cooperative, emotionally disturbed person versus a person with a knife in their hand. And even if you show up on the scene, when police officers show up on scenes and the knife is not in this person's hand, the potential of the knife still lingers. Where is it? So right away, there is no, let's say, for example, I'll give you an example. I
The
show up
person's gonna go in cuffs immediately, is
immediately.
what you're
There's
trying to
no
say.
discussing anything. There's no discussing
Yeah.
anything. He could be completely naked, sitting there watching Netflix, but I got there because he had a knife. He's being handcuffed. He's being secured.
Immediately, yes.
Yeah, immediately. Now, handcuff sounds horrible. I will admit it. It sounds horrible, but it is vital to the safety of that particular emotionally disturbed person
And to the
and
people around them.
and ourselves as well. Yeah, yeah.
And you know, a lot of times as you're grabbing them, you say, "Listen, cuffs on until you get to the hospital. You're not under arrest." We always tell them that you're not under arrest, but they know. And a lot of emotionally disturbed people have been to the hospital many times, and they know that
Have long
it's
history.
common that they go into handcuffs, but they might not know. This might be their first time. Tell them, "Listen, you're not under arrest. However, you go in cuffs until you get to the hospital. That's all. It's just our procedures. It's for your
You know,
safety and ours."
let me add this, David. There have been multiple families, and this is one of the reasons why we're having this podcast. There have been multiple families that have called on their family members for emotionally disturbed situations, family members out of control, like we had mentioned, name the scenario, and they called. And the outcomes have been unfortunately very violent. With that said, in most emotionally disturbed cases where the outcome has been extremely violent, it has been, for the most part, justified legally anyway. We just had a situation here in New York where a family had called on the family member's mother had called on her son. Police get there. He has a knife. He's not putting his knife down. There's a mother behind him. The mother is behind him. There was not a lot of room for containment. The mom's there. He's still violent. He's lunging at the cops, at the police officers. And unfortunately, they did have to fire upon this young man. Luckily, he survived. But I can imagine as a family member, what must I be thinking, right? I called because my son is having an emotionally disturbed episode. The police arrive and they shoot him. My
Right.
civilian mentality must be going through the roof. This is my son. And I called the police on him.
Yeah.
And the situation turned out to where he's being shot and now he's in the
Right.
hospital. God forbid.
And that is
passes away.
Santa, that's a great point. That's a great point. And like when you're talking about that, you're talking about they're calling because they want their family member to be helped, and they wound up seriously hurt or killed. Now, what's important to remember is that that almost never happens. You and I have both gone to. I know I've gone to hundreds of these calls, and nothing bad has happened to the person. I know I have been, look, I've been hit. Everything you can imagine. I've had baseball bat swung at my head. I've had people trying to take guns out on me, knives. It's always worked out. I've been fortunate too. I've been very fortunate. But the point is that very rarely does it result to deadly force. But let's flip this situation. So what could the cop have done differently in that situation? That's what I want people to tell me. Because I'm gonna give you an example, and it's valid for this, okay? I get a call. I was a lieutenant at the time in South Jamaica, Queens. I get a call. Male in the house stabbing his family members, stabbing his mother and sister. Okay. I get there within pretty quickly, like let's say 2 minutes, whatever it is. There's already 2 cops there. They are standing outside. They only had a couple of years on the job, not very experienced, but maybe like 2 years. But they're standing outside. The sister, one of the sisters who ran out of the house, is yelling at them, "Get in the house. He's stabbing everybody." And they are just sitting there looking at her like a deer in the headlights. So me and my boy Jose, we roll up. We run in the house. We understand what's going on. She already said it on the 911 call. We run in the house. We grab the guy. He's all bloody. He stabbed a couple of people. We handcuff him. No one died. We handcuff him and take him into custody. It turned out we didn't need to, we didn't need to shoot him or anything. Now, as a family member, that's what you want. If somebody is stabbing your family members, you want cops who are going to run in and take control of the situation. It's a different situation if you say, "Look, my son's a little depressed. He's sitting there. He won't talk to anybody." Cops don't necessarily need to run in and say, "What's going on, buddy?" You take that, you can take that slower. But if somebody's stabbing people, you want the cops to immediately run in, same as if somebody's shooting someone. You don't want someone shooting in a school, in a house, anywhere, and the cops to be outside saying, "Well, I don't really know. Why is he doing it?"
Yeah, let me add on to that. What I would say is this. I put an extreme situation. I gave an extreme example, and so did you. But at the same time, family members are still, and this is where we come into the liaison situation. I've gone to situations where the 911 call comes over as emotionally disturbed person, unknown weapons, or something along those lines, right?
Right.
And when you get there and the person says to you, "Yes, that's my son, daughter," so forth, because these are the questions we ask. Is this person prone to violence? Are there any weapons? And I'll give you an example. I'll be told, "Well, I don't think there are any weapons, but he has been prone to violence. But he's good right now. I just need for him to get to the hospital." You get there, and now you see this person, and now you have it in your mind. This person has been prone to violence first thing you want to do is contain them.
Right.
Have they taken their medication? That's another question that we've actually asked before we even like, no, he has not, or she has not taken their medication, and she was violent or he was violent early on today. We already know this person is going out of the hospital, right? So at that point, we then grab this person and we do it in a way that is not actually very pretty. We go back to the handcuff situation. We secure this person, cuff, 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 right? And I'm not saying that's going to happen all the time, but let's say it happens in this particular scenario. For something that we may see or we may decipher, it's best just to secure this person. A lot of family members look at it and say, well, why are you handcuffing him? This is not good. And no matter what the explanation, it just doesn't look good. I called for my son. I understand he's been violent, or my daughter, I understand she's been violent, but do you need the hand? It just doesn't look good. I've had family members break down in disparity because of that situation, right? And it doesn't always take a person to be violently prone, a history of violence. Just a raising of the voice, a gesture of pushing or something. So you know
Or
what?
if he tries to get away, he tries to get
Well,
away.
it's leave,
Not
right?
free to
Right.
go, but
Those
gotta be-
scenarios would lead us. You know what? We got to secure this person, right? And I've had situations where we've used not rubber, excuse me, the nylon straps to secure someone. You know, I can imagine I go back to this. Family members are looking at us like, oh my gosh, I don't want to call the police again because I don't
Well,
want to see him or her
Right.
dragged away this way. And then I think that's where the misconception you had asked me early on today in the podcast. What is the misconception? I think that's the part that people have to understand, that when the police respond to a emotionally disturbed person, I'm going to say this, and I might get a little bit of backlash for this. That's the best case scenario. The chances of violence happening is very minuscule. Very minuscule.
Violence against the cops, maybe, but the chances of violence against public,
themselves or the public, it's
a
very
lot less.
Very-
And how many times have you? I know I've had such situations where I rolled in and someone was slitting their wrists, and we yanked the knife out of their hand. That has happened.
yeah,
You know,
the
if we're
physical-
taking a risk in the
physical reaction to violence by trained professionals. That's just the way it is. But I go back to even non-violent scenarios, right? When 911 is called and the police arrive, even in situations where the person just wanted the ambulance, he himself or she herself is saying she's going through an episode, we still arrive, right? We still arrive there.
And I will say about that, well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I've had people who are very cooperative, even if they were living in alternate realities at the time. Like they might, you all the people like the person, the laser beams from the next door are directed at my head, or the microwaves, and I have to wear this helmet, and there's an elaborate fantasy. But sometimes they'll be like, no, I know I need to go to the hospital. That's what I got to do when this happens. I know that. But then you say, hold on, let me just search you first before you get in. They always got to search people before they get in the ambulance. You always have to search them. And you find 3 or 4 knives on this guy. This guy was in fight or flight mode, and he's expecting to possibly be exposed to violence, and so you have to not take anything for granted.
Yeah, there goes to what we were talking about. The escalation of violence, I'd say 90% of the time, is always there with emotionally disturbed people. I think in most scenarios, emotionally disturbed people have the highest percentage of possible escalation of violence, even when it comes to those things.
Well, yeah, but I wouldn't say, but I do, like I said, I've had a lot of very cooperative, emotionally disturbed people in my time. Either people call them themselves or family members call, and they're just like, yeah, I need to go. I know. But as a cop, you still can't take anything for granted. You be nice to people, you treat them respectfully, but you do have to understand that there's certain procedures. If I feel that there's a reason for you to be handcuffed, then you got to be handcuffed. If I don't, but you're still going to need to be searched, because like I said, I can't tell you how many times they've been so cooperative and so cooperative, but they've had dangerous weapons on them. And there's procedures you need to follow so that bad things don't happen. Because if you put someone in the ambulance, whether they're cuffed or not, they can't have a weapon on them. And then you put the EMTs at risk, you put the EMS people at risk, and you put the cops at risk and the medical staff at risk. So you can't do that. You have to do it the same way every time, which is saying, same as you do with arrests. You do a thorough search every time, because you want to make sure that you don't miss anything.
So I want to tap on to, again, we talked about where we have scenarios and it's a successful one, be it started violent or it didn't start violent, it's still a successful one because the person has been completely contained, safely transported to the hospital. And the way we did that, let's say, just for example, for the sake of this conversation, the person was removed somewhat violently. And when I say somewhat violently, I mean in handcuffs. That's not a high level of violence, but still, handcuffs are ugly. We can agree with that. And
Well,
so,
when especially when that you have to struggle to put them on.
and you have to
Yeah,
struggle
when
to
there's
put them on, right?
struggle when you're getting them on. Yeah.
Exactly. And so the scenario is that this person has been safely transported. They're in the hospital, and they're most likely going to get, well, there's a good likelihood they're going to get this treatment that they need. Here's the family. What we do with the family members, and I've seen this many scenarios where family members are distraught. Oh my God, my daughter, my son had to be pulled out of their home violently. They reacted violently. I think there is the part that's a big disconnect. As
Well,
police officers,
I agree with you,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I would say a couple of things because there's
Well, let me say
it's
this. Let
such
me say this first. I think that disconnect is so vital for the future scenarios and even people calling 911 again, specifically for police. Police officers should always take 5 seconds and approach these people, right? Hey, listen, ma'am, sir, your daughter, your son, he's safe. We're going to be here for a couple, we might not be here, but he's safe or she's safe. They're going to get the care they need. And we're happy that we got to this level where they're in this hospital bed, they're secure, the doctors are going to be treating them, and nothing happened. We're so grateful for that. If you need anything else, please contact us. And even if you have a card, just give it to them, and they might not never contact you again. Or even if they do, you can give them towards, a whole bunch of situations, a whole bunch of departments and agencies you can give them to, especially with the technology that we have now. But again, that just small touch of understanding between the public and the police departments, that's vital, I think, in my opinion.
once the situation is stabilized, like you're saying, you do go to the callers, whoever they might be, family members or caretakers, whoever. Listen, that unfortunately, he was struggling. He didn't want to go. You saw we had to tussle with him a little bit. Luckily, he's okay now, and we're gonna make sure he gets to the hospital. And you did the right thing. We're
Yeah,
just glad
but
that everything worked out.
that doesn't
Just
happen
basically
very
what you
often.
said.
That,
But that happens a lot. But I will say that there are also families who are routine calls, like they've called on their brother or sister 20 times already.
there we
So
go.
they
Therein
know
lies
that
what I'm saying. Therein lies what I'm saying.
they know the cops a lot of times have to
What
tussle.
about what?
I've had family members tell me, you're gonna have to fight with him. I've had family
But
members
there's
help me, but I've also had family members lie to me and say, "Oh no, he's not gonna fight you at all. He never does." And then it turns out he was violent the whole time. So what I would say is it's multifaceted. What you were saying, I agree 100% that you have to explain the reasons why you did everything, and you have to make sure that the more positive outcomes, the more people see, we'll call the police and it'll be a positive outcome. But
yeah.
you do have to explain why things were done, like you were saying.
Yeah, I think that there needs to be more education in regards to our duties, not so much our tactics. Our tactics don't really need to be explained other than training police officers. But on a separate note, I think the relationship between the public and the police departments, there needs to be a better understanding. And I think it starts off with understanding the role of police in certain scenarios, specifically emotionally disturbed people. It's not just, hey, let's take a depressed person to the hospital. It's securing them first, making sure that we safely do everything for this person possible, not only for them, obviously for the public, their family members, and then ourselves, of course. I think that that's just vital. And there's not a lot of that. There's not a lot of. Let me ask you a question. With domestic violence situations, and I'm sure we're gonna have a podcast in regards to that.
We
Um,
are, we are, we are.
there's a lot of follow up with domestic violence situations. A lot of follow up. Most police departments have separate units that deal with
Yeah.
domestic violence, right? Not just in New York City, throughout the country. I often wonder why there's not much, and this is just something that's just happens. There's not a lot of follow up with emotionally disturbed people. But two things I want to tell you. The first one, yes, we have as many domestic violent calls as much as EDP, sometimes more. And we still have police departments follow up, right? And in regards to follow ups, because of lack of resources, we don't have to give those follow ups to police officers. we could give those follow-ups to social workers. Right now in New York City, they're trying to implement a program where actually social workers show up to 911 emotionally disturbed calls, and every law enforcement agency, not just here in New York, but across the country, knows that's a horrible idea.
No, it's a horrible idea because people are gonna get
Horrible.
hurt and killed, and they're just
But
gonna wind up calling 911 anyway.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
but most agencies will agree social worker follow-ups are essential, and they will produce great results, especially in metropolitan type areas like New York, Chicago, LA, things of that nature. But we don't have that. We don't have that right now. We just don't.
No, so if they wanna have the social workers go out to those, I think that's a great idea. But like you said, it's not gonna work for 911 calls. It's just the 911,
That's like the
it's
rule.
the I mean,
Automatic medical follow-ups for these emotionally disturbed people, because again, it doesn't happen as often as people think, but it does happen a lot where emotionally disturbed people, the outcome is extremely violent, and that doesn't always mean someone dying. It just means it's just violent.
well, it's
So
fine. There's
we can just
hitting,
have
there's wrestling, there's
it can be violent. With that said, yeah, these professional medical follow-ups based on police interaction, 911 interaction, should be vital, and there should be a systems placed not just in New York but throughout the entire country in regards to that.
I definitely agree with that. The other thing that I would say that we didn't really cover too much is that I've seen, some worked at a cop. Mostly I was in NYPD, but I worked in a couple other cities as well. And what I've seen sometimes is NYPD, the call is so frequent, emotionally disturbed people, that every cop just knows how to, every patrol cop just knows how to handle it. But I've seen people say stuff like, well, if we send the person to the hospital, they're just going to get released, because you do see that. You'll respond to the same person sometimes 3 times in a 24-hour cycle. The only thing I can say about that is that it's just like with arrests. In a busy city, some people are going to slip through the cracks. It doesn't mean you don't do your job. So you might have to deal with the same person several times in a day, and you just do what you can, and you can't worry about what a doctor does or doesn't do. You just have to do your job properly, is what I would say for that. But I definitely agree with you that families, they do like that extra outreach. Like I said, I've had families who helped me when we were struggling with somebody. I've had families who were yelling at me, "Don't do it." I've had
Well, of
families
course,
who
of
told
course.
me, but yeah, it's important. It's very important and when you do have a good relationship with the family, it helps just
Oh,
tremendous.
100%. Especially if there's multiple interactions. We talked about how many times the family calls on these people or their family members multiple times. They have history, and so it just helps when you have a relationship with the police officer.
And
Good.
that's why you were saying something about this a couple weeks ago to me. It's not the subject of the show, but I'll just throw it out there real quick. You were remember about having that police community, having that cop who knows his sector, his beat. And so he knows that there's a house that this person's constantly, they're going to emotionally disturbed person jobs. The son has some issues, the brother or whatever. So that cop being able to have a relationship with the sister or the mother or whoever, and just say, hey, what's going on today? Just listen, this is what you have to tell the cops when they come. If I'm not around, that is very important. And
I
that
think we
can't
could do
be
that. I think we could do
overstated.
that. I think we could do that. And like you said, because of lack of resources in these metropolis areas, we would have to do that on a larger scale as far as education, not just with an officer knowing a certain sector. I think on a larger scale, using social media, using all facets of media, we inform the public on what to do and how to handle emotionally disturbed situations, and not only handle but understanding. Again, we go back to our role, understanding the police role. I think when people understand the police role, they're more comfortable. They're more comfortable in calling 911 for their family members. You got a violent person. I mean, just on a side note, I know of some people that have had their family members locked up in bathrooms, and I've gotten calls, and they've told me, "Hey, listen, I have this person locked up in the bathroom." I'm yelling over the phone, "Call 911, call 911," and that's the last thing they want to do. And I understand that, because they think, "Oh my God, they're going to kill my family member, or they're going to violently handle my family member." Going back full circle to our conversation, with better understanding and better community understanding, the violence that occurs with emotionally disturbed people, very municipal. There's not a lot of it. I would say 90 to 95% of those situations, if not 99, they usually result with containment, safe handling, and this person in the hospital getting the treatment that they need.
Right. And I'm just before we go, I want to talk about one more thing. Since you mentioned containment a bunch of times, a lot of people they for isolate and contain. Now, when that means is to isolate and contain, if you have an armed individual who is isolated, who is by themselves, and you know they're by themselves, and they're in a place they can't get out of, such as a bathroom without, and you can watch the bathroom and stuff like that, that is an isolated and contained individual. A individual is not isolated and contained if they're inside a house full of people. Those people are all in danger. So when you say to police isolate and contain, a man walking down the street holding a knife is not isolated and contained and cannot be isolated and contained in any practical sense. Unless you had some barrier or fence you could throw over him. So when there are certain situations where somebody can be isolated and contained, a house, for a fact the house is empty and there's no one inside. And that's a big if, because you can't be wrong about that. And you know that it's only one person. At that point, that person might be isolated and contained if you're also watching the entire house to make sure they can't run out the back or anything like that. But you really have to be careful. I remember with the Deborah Danner was a woman who was shot by police a number of years ago, and the situation was an NYPD sergeant responded. It's a very common call. Female EDP with scissors threatening people in the hallway or something like that. He gets there and he convinces her to put the scissors down, like we do all the time, right? Did a good job. But then she runs into a bedroom and he follows her. That's normal. I remember Mayor de Blasio had said, oh, he should have isolated and contained. That's not true. He doesn't know if there's anyone else in the bedroom. B, by that point, if you're with an emotionally disturbed person, just like if you're with someone you're going to arrest, you don't let them go into another room because you don't know what they're going to get in that other room. Now, so you're immediately going to try and grab them before they could get anything else. Now, I don't know what happened with that situation, but all I know is that people saying isolate and contain, you have to really think about what isolate and contain means. Isolate and contain is if someone runs into a bathroom with a knife and shuts the door, and I know they're the only one in that bathroom, yeah, I shouldn't kick the door and grit them because there's a good chance I'm going to get stabbed or they're going to get shot or something like that or hurt badly. It's a situation where you have to take your time. But, as long as you're watching the bathroom window as well, make sure they don't jump out the bathroom window. But it's a situation where people are in an apartment or something like that and there's other people around, or you don't know who's in there. It's not a situation where you can really isolate and contain.
Well, I'll say this. I can see where the public would like containment, and I personally think containment is great if the scenario permits it. A lot of times it doesn't. But with containment, just so people know, even containment sometimes feels violent. You lock a person in a bathroom, that's my family member, right? But containment allows for control of the situation. You have the person, they're contained. They're right now not 100%, but right now we've controlled the situation where they're in this, whatever it could be, a bedroom, a bathroom, a closet, even an apartment, whatever the scenario dictates that this person is contained, it allows for agencies, law enforcement agencies, to think a little bit better. Let's pull some resources. Let's get them. For example, in the case of New York City Police Department, we have emergency services that show up with a lot more training and a lot more equipment that, number one, they can get there. By the time they get there, there are multiple police officers on the scene that have assessed and able to give them more information in regards to what they're about to deal with. And the scenario goes from 100 to 5 in milliseconds, right?
Right.
So containment gives us that option. So that's what we want, right? Again, it doesn't always permit it, but containment, and I got to tell you, I've in my time, I've seen very little containment scenarios.
Well, it's when it works, it's great. When we can, we do. I mean, cops do it when they can, but it's just I think people don't understand that a lot of times you can't. You have to worry about the public. You have to worry about other people. And I'll throw something else out. I've had people, you and I know you and I have gone when someone blew their brains out, and we've had to force the door open. We didn't know what we were going to find in there, and the person had already shot themselves in the head. And I mean, if somebody's bleeding, like I said, I've had to take knives out of people that were slitting their wrists at the time. So it's like you also do want police to try to help the person. It's not only because we're mainly there for that person as well. So it's like if somebody there are situations where, yeah, granted, we would isolate and contain inside a bathroom or something like that. But if the person already slit their wrists, I saw them slit their wrists, and I think they're bleeding out, I'm worried about that person. It has nothing to do with law enforcement at that point. It's about the community caretaking aspect of policing, which is to protect life.
Right,
And
right.
so, there was those issues as well. But you just got to point, at the end of the day, you don't want somebody getting shot because they were trying to kill themselves. So
Yeah.
it's very rare that happens. It's extraordinarily rare, but there are different aspects that you have to consider, and no two situations are exactly the
If
same.
I
Is
may,
what I'm
before we go, because I know we got limited time, I just want to add on that that's the goal of emotionally disturbed scenarios or calls, is to make sure that that doesn't happen, that someone does not lose their life, which
right.
happens. It happens a lot throughout the country, not per se in New York City as much, but it happens a lot throughout the country where a lot of these emotionally disturbed people, they end up losing their life. The most popular one, and this is something that most people know, is suicide by police, suicide by cop, as they call it. Those scenarios are what we try to avoid from the very beginning. That's in
Right.
every police officer's head. We want to avoid the most violent thing from happening, right? And we're going to try to do everything in our power to do that. And I think that through liaison work, like I talked about with social workers and their place, because I think it's a great idea, but it needs to be used properly. And in the use of law enforcement, again, I stand by it that it is the best case scenario when the police show up when it comes to handling emotionally disturbed people. So I'll just give you the scenario exactly what happened. Uber driver, young lady on the corner, she calls an Uber driver. She's completely intoxicated, but she calls an Uber driver. As you know, Uber gives you a description of the vehicle that you're getting, a color, even the color and make. And an Uber driver with that exact description pulls up on the corner and drops off someone. She approaches the driver and she says, "You're my Uber driver." So like, "No, man, I'm not. I actually am here dropping off someone." "No, you're not. You're my Uber driver. This is the vehicle that I'm getting on." He locks the door and she just starts going bazonkers on his car. And she starts damaging the car. She did quite a lot of damage. Just to keep the story short, it was about over $6,000 worth of damage between the window, the side doors, and stuff like that. Anyway, when we get there, by the time we get there, I just want you to put this in your head. 911 is called by this Uber driver and some other people. We get the call. We then respond. By that time that we respond, you would think that the scenario would change. In other words, she's either tired, she already did the damage that she did. No, she was still going full hardcore on this vehicle when we got there. When we get there, we get out the car, and she looked as average as possible. The last person that you would think would have an emotional disturbed scenario or episode like this. It was the last person that I would never
Was
have.
she drunk? I assume she was just super drunk,
So
right?
she was completely intoxicated. Just to
Yeah.
keep it
Yeah.
short, she was completely intoxicated. But the violence that she was just exuding just shocked, and I don't even know her. It shocked me. As I was, you could just tell with obviously with experience as a police officer, you could just tell certain dynamics of people. And this is not the typical person that you would see even in handcuffs. It's just not. I don't put anything past anyone, but this was just not that scenario.
Right.
Long story short, when we got her back to the station, I had to process her for unfortunately the damage that she had done to the vehicle.
Right. She was
Um,
charged with
she
criminal
was charged.
mischief.
She was
Yeah.
charged with multiple damages to the vehicle, unfortunately, and her family showed up. And it turns out this was a highly educated woman, very respected. She had never been in trouble in her life. I couldn't find anything on her, and this was just a situation where she just lost complete control. Now, I'm not talking about she was intoxicated like many of us are. We fall over, we get sleepy. No, she was just extremely violent. And that emotionally disturbed situation, episode of hers, caused her, to receive criminal charges against her. But the way we handled it, I got to tell you, it exudes the experience of having police officers that know what they're doing. We managed to get her to where she was not harmed. She didn't harm herself. We had a paramedic show up at the station house to do her a once over. Unfortunately, we had a choice. We didn't have a choice. We had to process her for an arrest. But the way we handled it is that we just made sure that she was safely contained, and we
Right, and
managed.
in other words,
And
you probably handcuffed her pretty quickly.
right, immediately.
Immediately, right,
Yeah,
because at the end of the day, then you're gonna determine what to do after that, but the most
exactly.
important thing is the safety and to make sure the situation doesn't get worse. Because
Right,
the
right.
more you let somebody rant and rave, and if they're currently continuing being violent or just overly demonstrative and out of control, the worse you let it get, the worse it's gonna get, and the more you give opportunities for bad things to happen,
Definitely. Perfect scenario in regards to that. Exact scenario in
right?
regards to that.
Right. And to piggyback on that, that is a great point. And one of the most important things is like we've talked about it. I don't know if we talked about it earlier here, is getting those handcuffs on quick.
Yeah,
Because the more someone's walking around and you're not controlling their hands and they're getting more and more agitated, the more likely it is that then they're gonna pick something up and try and cut
yeah,
out. The way you avoid that happening is as soon as you can, you put those cuffs on to
yeah,
take
bro.
them to cut into custody, unless there's no need for the cuffs. But I'm talking about someone who's very agitated and needs to be handcuffed to get to the
Yeah,
hospital.
yeah,
And it's very important to get them on quickly rather than trying to. Sometimes you can't talk someone into cuffs. A lot of times you can, but sometimes just the two of you going up, grabbing them, grabbing their wrists. Sometimes that'll work, and sometimes there'll be a wrestling match. It happens. And finally, we're gonna say this again and again in this podcast. Other cops have said it. It's not easy always manhandling a grown man. It's a
yeah. Or
difficult.
a
It's
grown woman.
difficult, and or a grown woman if she's especially if she's got some size on her. It's if it's a 90-pound girl, it's usually fairly easy. I'm not gonna saying she can't hurt you, but if you wind up tussling with her, it's not as. But if it's a man with any kind of size or a woman with any kind of size, it's not as easy as they show it in the movies, and it looks very violent.
Yeah, it
Even
does.
if no one gets hurt, it looks very violent and it looks very bad. And
Horrible,
policing,
horrible optics.
people don't like the way policing looks.
Yeah,
Yeah, and there's no way around it. I mean, if you've ever been in a fights are ugly. They're ugly, and we don't like to do it. We don't like to do it, but it's just that sometimes it's unavoidable. Sometimes you use a little bit of force, so you don't have to use more later. And sometimes using that little bit, and you tussle with someone, but then that prevents them from grabbing a weapon that they could put themselves in a lot more danger with.
okay.
And okay, so I think that's probably good for that. I'm gonna wrap it up. Santo, as always, I want to thank you for being on the show. I
Oh,
love
it's
the
a pleasure.
sunglasses, man.
Oh no, these are not my sunglasses. Okay, these are my glasses.
But they're the kind that they get dark.
A transition, yes. I don't know why that's.
Okay.
I don't know why this is a topic of the conversation. I'm not an emotionally disturbed person.
I never said you were. I think it looks pretty cool, pretty badass actually. I like it.
On a serious note, thank you for having me on this very important podcast. I think it's great that we had this conversation. I think that the importance of giving this information out to the public, we want you to call and get help for your family members. We want you to reach out to all your resources wherever you live to try to get the best help for your family members or loved ones or even neighbors and friends. We want you to understand that the law enforcement, when it comes to these particular type of scenarios, is there to number one, help that particular person. And I think that I think the goal of this podcast is to help people understand that. And I'm looking forward to more informational type of podcasts from you in the future.
And that's what we're gonna do. That's what we're just gonna talk about. Where this isn't a podcast where people complain and try and deal with old grievances or anything like that. I personally think policing is one of the most important jobs in the country. I loved it. I loved the job. I know there's a lot of problems with it. I complained as much as everyone else did during my career, but I still did the job. And I think it's a very important job, and to talk about things that could be done better, and to also think about how police can maybe get the communities back on our side, because they should be, because police do a lot of good things.
Great.
And okay, I'm just gonna wrap it up. But Santo, thank you so much. And we will see you next time, bro. All right. Okay, so that was our show on emotionally disturbed people. So, like Santo had mentioned, our society has a big problem with mental illness. Okay. I think most societies probably do. And police are inevitably going to be called into the midst of that when somebody is acting erratically in a manner that they can't be at that point reasoned with, or they might not even be capable of being reasoned with at that time. Police do a very good job generally, especially the more experienced the cop is, and the more of these calls they've been on, they do generally do a very good job. Remember, and a lot of times we do have to talk with the person for a while to we didn't really cover this as much, but a lot of times we do have to, as long as the person's calm and not agitated in a way that they're a danger to themselves or anybody else, we at the particular moment, we can speak to people and we can empathize with them and try and establish a rapport. Okay. But this myth that police, especially the NYPD, is indiscriminately murdering or hurting emotionally disturbed people is not true. No statistics bear that out. You have to look at it the same way you look at the crime rate. The New York City Police Department responded to thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of emotionally disturbed persons calls every year, and almost nobody is killed. It does make the news when it happens, but you do have to ask yourself, what could have been done differently? It might not be the cops who did anything. They didn't. It was just a bad situation. And, I mean, there's only so much a police officer can do. At the end of the day, we didn't cover this either in the discussion, is that police do carry tasers in New York City now. But if someone's running at you with a knife, you cannot tase them because a taser is a one-shot pony. If both darts don't hit and at a good enough spread and penetrate the clothing, it's not going to work. And then that person is on you and stabbing you. So you do have to remember that when we had these recent incidents, that the cops probably did everything they could have done. And it was just a tragic situation. And it doesn't, it doesn't do anything for the family to know that, but it is something that it was not the police's fault. And if the police, generally speaking, I can't tell you how many times I've been in situations where we could have used a lot more force or shot somebody and didn't, and we just took time and it wound up working out. But sometimes you don't have that time. Time is not something that you can manufacture more of. Sometimes you just don't have the time. Okay, so that's it for this podcast. Once again, my new book, Bullets Over Bourbon, is coming out. Appreciate it. If you buy it, comment on it. You could buy it on Amazon. You could buy it on as an ebook or the paperback. Either way is great. And if you like it, feel free to write a review. And my other book, Another Body in Brooklyn, still available on Amazon and all online book retailers. And thank you so much. And we will see you next podcast. In the meantime, we'll try to treat each other nicely and have some understanding for each other. All right.